The fluorescent lights of the cafeteria at 2 a.m., trays still set out, hummed a sickly yellow. It was a sound I'd grown intimately familiar with over the past few months, a constant, low thrumming beneath the clatter of plastic cutlery and the murmur of late-night students. Each half-eaten sandwich, each smear of ketchup on a forgotten tray, felt like a testament to my own stalled progress. My textbooks lay open, a battlefield of ink and highlighter, but my mind was a desert. Another rejection email sat unread in my inbox, the subject line a stark, clinical white against the dim glow of my laptop screen. "We regret to inform you." The words blurred, a familiar ache settling behind my eyes. Then the official-looking envelope arrived. Thick, cream-colored stock, embossed with a crest I didn't recognize. It was from a law firm, a name I'd never heard before, referencing a Mr. Elias Thorne. Thorne. The name meant nothing. My family tree, as far as I knew, was a stunted thing, pruned back generations ago. But the letter spoke of an inheritance from this Elias Thorne. My breath hitched. I reread the document, my fingers tracing the precise, elegant script. A property. A rather substantial property, it seemed, described in legalistic terms that painted a picture of vast acreage and a dwelling of significant age. The will was cryptic, filled with odd stipulations about living on the premises for a full year before any substantial portion of the wealth could be claimed. A year. It sounded like a trap, a cruel joke from a relative I'd never known. Yet the alternative was this endless cycle of ramen noodles and mounting debt, the suffocating weight of unrealized potential. The money, the sheer amount mentioned in vague, staggering figures, was a siren song I couldn't ignore. The law firm provided directions, a single sheet of paper detailing a route that led further and further from any recognizable civilization. The address itself seemed to exist in a forgotten corner of the map. The nearest town was a dart, barely a smudge, and the final leg of the journey was described as a private road. A private road. The kind that likely dissolved into a rutted track, swallowed by overgrown trees. My car, a sputtering relic that had seen better days, felt woefully inadequate for such an expedition. But the thought of the alternative, the slow, grinding descent into obscurity, was far more terrifying. The drive was long. Hours bled into each other, the familiar cityscape giving way to rolling hills that eventually flattened into a bleak, windswept plain. The sky, once a cheerful blue, had bruised into shades of bruised purple and ominous gray. Rain began to fall, a fine, persistent mist that clung to the windshield like a shroud. The GPS signal flickered and died, leaving me with only the faded directions and a growing sense of unease. The private road, when I finally found it, was less a road and more a suggestion of one. Branches scraped against the car's paintwork, a percussive symphony of warning. The air grew heavy, damp, and carried the faint, unsettling scent of decaying leaves and something else, something metallic and sour. The trees pressed in, their branches' skeletal fingers reaching out, obscuring the sky. The silence when I finally killed the engine was profound, not a peaceful quiet, but a heavy, watchful stillness. It felt as though the world itself was holding its breath. The mansion loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the bruised sky. It wasn't just old, it looked wrong. The angles were too sharp, the windows like vacant eyes staring out from a gaunt face. A single turret, impassably tall and narrow, pierced the mist, looking like a needle poised to prick the heavens. The will had mentioned a caretaker, a man named Silas, who would be expecting me. But as I stepped out of the car, the only sound was the drip, drip, drip of rain from unseen eaves. It seeped into my bones, a primal instinct screaming at me to turn back. But the promise of Elias Thorne's fortune, the desperate hope it offered, was a stronger pull. I pushed the heavy oak door open. Had I made a terrible mistake? Each half-eaten sandwich, the crusts left untouched, the fruit bruised and forgotten, felt like a tiny monument to dashed hopes. My own sandwich, a pale imitation of sustenance, lay untouched before me. I was supposed to be studying, cramming for the final exams that loomed like a dark storm front. Instead, my mind kept drifting, snagged on the peculiar terms of the will. Immense wealth, it promised, enough to escape the ramen and fluorescent light existence I'd been resigned to. All I had to do was inhabit the mansion for a year. A year. It sounded like a fairy tale, except the benefactor was a great-aunt twice removed, a woman whose name I'd never even heard whispered in my family. The letter had arrived in a thick, cream-colored envelope, the kind that felt substantial, important. The lawyer's office, a sterile space that smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper, had been where I'd learned the details. The mansion, Blackwood Manor, stood on acres of overgrown land, miles from anywhere. It was, the lawyer had stated with a carefully neutral expression, a significant property. He'd also mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that it had been unoccupied for decades. Decades. My stomach had tightened then, a knot of apprehension mixed with a desperate, gnawing hope. Now, the hum of the cafeteria lights seemed to mark my indecision. I pushed my sandwich away. Raj, I told myself, this is it. This is my chance. I pictured the peeling paint of my current apartment, the perpetual chill that seeped through the window frames, the gnawing anxiety about tuition fees. Blackwood Manor, however dilapidated, represented an escape. A grand, albeit dusty, escape. The drive out was long, the paved road giving way to gravel, then to a rutted track that tested the limits of my aging car. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. By the time the iron gates, twisted and rust-eaten, loomed into view, a prickle of unease had settled deep in my gut. The gates groaned open on ancient hinges, a sound like a wounded animal. Blackwood Manor itself was a silhouette against the fading light. Ivy, thick as a man's arm, snaked its way up the walls, clinging to crumbling mortar. The front door, a heavy slab of oak, creaked inward with a reluctant sigh. The silence was profound, broken only by the frantic thudding of my own heart. My footsteps echoed unnervingly as I ventured deeper. The furniture was draped in white sheets, ghostly forms in the gloom. I ran a hand along the banister of the grand staircase, the wood surprisingly smooth beneath a thick layer of dust, almost polished by time and disuse. That first night, sleep was a battlefield. I found myself straining my ears, listening for something, anything, beyond the house's own breathing. I told myself it was just the settling of an old building, the natural sounds of a place unused for so long. I woke abruptly, my body rigid, my breath catching in my throat. The moonlight, a pale, spectral glow, streamed through my bedroom window, illuminating the room in stark silver lines. It was then I heard it. A faint scratching sound, coming from within the walls. It was rhythmic, insistent, like tiny claws skittering just beneath the plaster. I held my breath, straining to identify the source. It wasn't the scurrying of mice. This was slower, more deliberate. It sounded intelligent, but the feeling of being watched, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, lingered long after the scratching had ceased. There was the house truly empty. Each half-eaten sandwich, each spilled coffee stain on the linoleum, felt like a testament to the gnawing uncertainty that had become my constant companion since inheriting the mansion. This place, this sprawling, shadowed monument to someone else's forgotten life, was supposed to be my escape. Instead, it had become a cage, its bars invisible but suffocating. I traced the condensation ring left by my own lukewarm tea. Outside, the wind, a constant lament against the mansion's stone, had picked up. It rattled the ancient window panes with a sound like brittle bones grinding together. I tried to ignore it at first, attributing the creaks and groans to the age of the structure, to the settling of timbers that had stood for centuries. But lately, the sounds had a deliberate quality, a marking cadence that felt directed at me. Last night, it was a scraping, a slow, dragging sound from the floor above, directly over my bedroom. It wasn't the wind. It sounded like something heavy, something unwilling being pulled across bare wood. My phone, usually a lifeline, felt like a dead weight in my pocket. I'd called my sister, my only family, a week ago. The line had crackled, her voice distant, distorted as if she were speaking from the bottom of a well. She'd sounded worried, her words tumbling over each other in a rush, but then the connection had died. No signal. Not in the mansion, not even on the overgrown grounds. I tried the landline, the one that came with the property, but it was a dead thing. its receiver a hollow ear that offered no reply. The postman, usually a cheerful presence, had stopped coming. His van, a familiar red splash against the grey lane, was no longer a welcome sight. The mailbox, a rusted moor at the end of the long, winding drive, remained stubbornly empty. The air in the cafeteria felt thick, cloying, carrying the stale scent of forgotten meals and disinfectant. I shivered, pulling my worn cardigan tighter. I kept my gaze fixed on the chipped formica tabletop, on the meaningless patterns etched into its surface. Looking up felt like an invitation, but it wasn't the wind. It was closer, intimate. It sounded like my name. Raj. I flinched, my hand flying to my ear. Nothing, just the hum of the lights, the distant drip of a leaky faucet. My heart, a frantic bird against my ribs, began its familiar, unwelcome rhythm. I remembered the lawyer, his smooth, unctuous tone as he'd handed me the keys. He'd spoken of the will, of the vast inheritance, of the conditions. The property must be occupied, Mr. Raj, continuously, for 1 year. Only then will the full estate be yours. He'd smiled, a thin, shark-like grin. I dismissed his words as the usual legal jargon, the eccentricities of a long-dead relative. I pushed my chair back, the screech of its legs against the floor unnervingly loud. I needed to leave this room, this suffocating bubble of late-night despair. I stood, my legs feeling unsteady, as if I hadn't walked in days. The walk to the dormitory felt longer than usual. The corridors, usually bustling with students, were deserted. Each door I passed seemed to hold its breath, a silent witness to my solitary passage. The faint scent of dust and old paper, the signature aroma of the mansion, seemed to cling to my clothes, to my very skin. When I reached my room, the door felt heavier than it had that morning. I fumbled with the lock, my fingers clumsy, slick with sweat. I didn't bother with the light switch. I knew what I would see. The same sparse furnishings, the same peeling wallpaper that seemed to writhe with unseen patterns in the dim light filtering through the grimy window. But tonight, something was different. On my desk, where I'd left my laptop and a stack of unopened mail, sat a single, wilting rose. Its petals were a bruised, velvety red, tinged with an unsettling black at the edges. It hadn't been there when I left. I was sure of it. I hadn't brought any flowers into the room. No one else had been in here. I stood frozen, staring at the bloom, its sickly sweet scent filling the small space. It smelled like decay, and beneath the perfume, a faint metallic tang like old pennies. My breath hitched. The floorboards outside my door creaked. A slow, deliberate sound. Someone was standing there, listening, waiting. Was it the wind playing tricks again, or something else entirely? Each half-eaten sandwich, each abandoned textbook seemed to amplify the oppressive quiet. I traced the condensation ring a forgotten coffee cup had left on the laminate tabletop, the cool dampness seeping into my fingertips. Raj, that was me, and I was stuck in this house, this mausoleum. The will, the supposed fortune, it all felt like a cruel joke now. The only thing I was inheriting was a gnawing unease, a constant prickle on my skin, and the suffocating silence. I tried calling again, my phone a dead weight in my pocket. No signal, not even a flicker. The nearest town, a speck on the map I'd barely glanced at before arriving, felt 1,000 miles away. Beyond it, nothing but the dense, ink-black woods that surrounded the estate. I'd seen shapes in the periphery, fleeting movements that dissolved the moment I turned my head. Sleep offered little respite. The dreams were worse. Not nightmares, not exactly. They were memories, or echoes of memories. Today, though, a different kind of energy had settled over me. A frantic, almost desperate curiosity. I couldn't just sit here waiting for the house to consume me. I needed answers. I started in the library, a cavernous room choked with dust and the scent of decaying paper. Sunlight, weak and filtered through grimy panes, illuminated motes of dust dancing in the air. The books were ancient, their bindings brittle, their pages filled with elegant script that blurred into illegibility under my tired eyes. I ran my fingers along the spines, feeling the rough texture of aged leather, the sharp edges of forgotten titles. I spent hours poring over ledgers, journals, anything that might offer a clue to the previous inhabitants, to this place. Most of it was mundane, crop yields, household expenses, cryptic notations about weather patterns. But then, tucked away in a false bottom of a heavy oak desk, I found it. A small, leather-bound diary, its cover embossed with a faded crest I didn't recognize. My hands trembled as I opened it. The ink was faint, the handwriting spidery and agitated. The walls listen. One entry read, the letters nearly bleeding into each other. They remember, and they hunger. Another passage dated decades later. The music. It calls to them. It always calls. Music. What music? The house had no radio, no records. I tried to recall any sounds I might have heard, beyond the house's own unsettling symphony of creaks and groans. Nothing. I moved to the west wing, a section I'd avoided until now. Cobwebs brushed against my face like skeletal fingers. In the center of the largest room, draped in a shroud of dust sheets, stood a grand piano. Its ebony surface gleamed dully even beneath the grime. I approached it slowly, my footsteps unnervingly loud on the bare floorboards. The air around it felt charged. A faint, almost imperceptible vibration seemed to emanate from it. I reached out, my fingers hovering over the keys. They were cool, smooth, and strangely inviting. A phantom melody, a lament, seemed to whisper at the edge of my hearing. Could this be it? The music the diary spoke of. My fingers, almost of their own volition, pressed down on a single ivory key. A note, clear and resonant, filled the vast emptiness. As the last echo died, I heard it. A soft, rustling sound coming from the far corner of the room. It was the sound of something shifting, something that had been dormant, now stirring. What had I just awakened? The heavy oak door of the west wing groaned open, a drawn-out shriek that scraped against my nerves. I stepped inside, my boot landing on a thick, threadbare carpet that seemed to swallow the sound. The air here was different, stale and cloying, like old perfume and dust. A faint, metallic tang pricked the back of my throat. I'd been avoiding this wing, a nebulous dread clinging to it, but the music, or whatever it was, had drawn me. Now there was only silence, thick and oppressive. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating peeling wallpaper patterned with faded roses, their petals curling like desiccated skin. I told myself it was just the weak light, my own exhaustion playing tricks, but the feeling persisted, a prickling awareness that I was not alone. The house breathed around me, a slow, rhythmic inhale and exhale that vibrated through the floorboards. I moved deeper, each step a conscious effort. The rooms here were more intimate, smaller than the grand halls of the main house. A study, perhaps, with an overturned armchair and scattered papers. A dressing room, its vanity mirror clouded with a film that no amount of rubbing would clear. And then a door, smaller than the others, almost hidden in a recess. It was slightly ajar. A faint, sweet smell emanated from within, not unpleasant but deeply unsettling like overripe fruit. I pushed the door open. It was a pantry surprisingly well stocked. Jars of preserves lined the shelves, their contents a murky, unidentifiable hue. Cans, their labels faded beyond recognition. And in the center of the room, on a small, round table, sat a single, perfect apple. It gleamed under my flashlight, impassably red, impassably fresh. It looked like it had been placed there moments ago. My stomach rumbled, a sharp, insistent pang. I hadn't eaten properly since breakfast. The apple was so inviting, so vivid against the decay surrounding it. Just one bite, you're starving. But the sweetness in the air, the unnatural perfection of the fruit, it felt like a trap. This house wasn't just old, it was hungry. I backed away slowly, my eyes never leaving the apple. The air in the pantry seemed to thicken, pressing in on me. The sweet scent intensified, cloying now, suffocating. I felt a dizzying sensation, a lightness in my head. I stumbled back into the hallway, slamming the pantry door shut. The sound echoed, a sharp crack that startled me. I leaned against the wall, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My hands trembled. I needed to get out. I needed to see the sun, to feel the wind on my face, to know that the world beyond these walls still existed. I practically ran down the west wing, my footsteps loud and clumsy. As I reached the bottom, a sound stopped me. It was the clatter of trays, not the creaking of the house or the wind outside. This was distinct, metallic, the unmistakable sound of plates and cutlery being scraped. It was coming from downstairs, from the direction of the old servants' quarters, which led to the forgotten basement. My blood felt like ice. I hadn't been down there since I'd arrived. It was a labyrinth of damp concrete and rusted machinery, a place I deliberately avoided. But the sound was undeniable, a rhythmic, persistent clinking as if someone was setting out plates. My initial impulse was to flee, to bolt for the front door and never look back. But a stubbornness, refusal to be driven out, rooted me to the spot. Raj, I inherited this place. There's a fortune here. I can't let it scare I away. I turned, my flashlight beam cutting a shaky path towards the service stairs, something metallic like old blood. The sound of trays grew louder, more distinct. I rounded a corner, my heart racing, and then I saw it. The cafeteria at 2 a.m., trays still set out. It was a large, utilitarian room, its walls stained with grime. Long metal tables were arranged with military precision, and on each table, perfectly aligned, were trays. Empty trays, clean and gleaming under the harsh glare of a single bare bulb hanging precariously from the ceiling. The clatter had stopped. The room was silent, save for the drip, drip, drip of water somewhere in the distance. But it wasn't the empty trays that made my breath hitch. It was the chairs. Every single chair was pulled out, as if a crowd had just risen from their meal, and on the seat of each chair, neatly folded, was a single white napkin. My flashlight beam swept across the room, lingering on the empty chairs, the pristine trays, the folded napkins. It was too deliberate, too staged. It felt like a tableau, a scene waiting for actors who would never arrive. The metallic tang in the air was stronger here, sharp and carpery. I stepped further into the room, my boots echoing on the concrete floor. I could see my breath misting in front of me. I felt an overwhelming sense of being watched, of unseen eyes tracking my every move. The house had drawn me here. It had lured me with the promise of wealth, then isolated me, then filled me with unease. Now it had shown me this. What? A feast that never happened. A gathering that was interrupted. I looked at the empty chairs, the waiting trays. The house wasn't just a structure. It was a stage, and I was the unwilling performer. But what was the play, and who or what was the audience? The apple sat on the polished oak table, a perfect crimson orb. It seemed to pulse with a faint internal light, a beacon in the oppressive gloom of the dining hall. The air, once thick with the cloying scent of decay, now carried a faint, sweet perfume, like overripe peaches left too long in the sun. It was too much. The sweetness, the stillness, the impassable perfection of that single piece of fruit. It was a lie, a lure. My hand, unbidden, reached for it. My fingers brushed its cool, waxy skin. A shiver traced its way down my spine, not from cold, but from a profound, instinctual wrongness. I snatched my hand back as if burned. They spoke of hunger, of waiting, of a patience that stretched back centuries. They promised solace, a release from the gnawing loneliness that had been my constant companion since I arrived. But I knew better. This house was a predator. I had to get out. Escape, but how? The heavy oak doors of the mansion were sealed from the inside. I tried them, of course, the first week. They were as immovable as the stone foundations. The windows, tall and arched, offered views of a landscape that seemed to shift and blur when I focused on it, the trees twisting into grotesque caricatures, the sky a bruised, unnatural purple. No escape there. My mind raced, sifting through the meager knowledge I'd acquired. The cryptic journal entries, the faded blueprints, the strange symbols etched into the stone in the cellar. They spoke of a connection, a tethering. The house fed on something, on me, on my fear, my despair, my isolation, if I could sever that connection. But how? I remembered the hidden passages, the ones I'd discovered behind loose tapestries and trick bookshelves. They led nowhere useful, or so I'd thought. Just dusty, forgotten crawl spaces and disused service tunnels. But perhaps one of them led out. It was a slim hope, but it was all I had. Each creak of the floorboards, each groan of the ancient timbers, felt like a deliberate attempt to betray me. I reached the library, the scene of my earliest unease. The air here was heavy with the scent of old paper and something else, something metallic and faint, like dried blood. I ran my hand along the spines of the leather-bound volumes, searching for the telltale seam, the slight give that indicated a hidden door. My fingers found it behind a row of forgotten theological texts. A section of the wall, cleverly disguised as a bookshelf, swung inward with a low groan. It smelled of damp earth and something acrid, like old vinegar. This was it. A chance. I grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from a nearby table, its weight a small comfort in my trembling hand. I stepped into the passage, pulling the hidden door shut behind me. The click of the latch was unnervingly loud. I fumbled for the candlestick, striking it against the stone wall. A shower of sparks erupted, illuminating for a fleeting moment a narrow, winding tunnel, its walls slick with condensation. They were different now, more intimate, more personal. They spoke of my deepest insecurities, the failures I'd tried to bury, the people I'd let down. They painted vivid pictures in my mind, replays of embarrassing moments, of moments of profound shame. I saw my parents' disappointed faces, my own clumsy attempts at connection with others, all twisted and magnified. My breath hitched in my throat. This was not leading out. It was leading deeper in. It promised understanding, acceptance. It told me I was weak, flawed, and that this place, this house, was the only one that truly saw me, truly understood me. It offered a twisted form of comfort, a surrender. My legs felt heavy, my resolve wavering. The warmth of the candlestick began to fade, the flame sputtering as if struggling for air. The house was not just a prison, it was a mirror, reflecting back the worst parts of myself, amplifying them, feeding on them. Which way? My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Then a new sound, a faint, rhythmic clanging like metal on metal, echoing from the left-hand passage. It was a sound from the outside world, a sound of industry, of life. Hope surged through me, a desperate, painful thing. I lunged towards the sound, my feet slipping on the slick stone. The passage opened into a vast, cavernous space. It was a space I recognized from the blueprints, a disused storage area perhaps, but it was filled with something new. Rows upon rows of metal shelves, laden with nothing, empty, and in the center of the vast room a single overturned metal table. Trays scattered across the grimy floor. The clanging had stopped. The air here was thick with the smell of stale grease and something else, something metallic and foul. It was the cafeteria at 2 a.m., trays still set out. But wrong, utterly wrong, and then I saw it. It was unnervingly tall, its silhouette sharp against the weak light. It didn't move, it didn't breathe, but I felt its gaze on me, a weight that crushed the air from my lungs. It was waiting for what? The apple. It was still there. I'd left it on the table, a stupid, beautiful, impossible thing. I'd walked away, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence, convinced it was a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by too little sleep and too much dust. But here it was, a vibrant splash of color against the Sama oak, radiating that sickly, sweet perfume that clung to the back of my throat. It was real. It had to be. I circled the table, my boots scuffing the Persian rug, a faded tapestry of forgotten hunts and stern-faced ancestors. The room felt smaller now, the high ceilings pressing down, the shadows pooling like spilled ink. I reached out, my fingers hovering inches above the apple. It seemed to hum, a low vibration that resonated in my bones. I snatched my hand back. This house was playing with me. It was a child with a cruel streak, a puppet master pulling invisible strings. It offered me a perfect, tempting thing, then watched as I recoiled. What did it want? What was the game? The will had promised wealth, but this was a different kind of inheritance, a parasitic one. I turned from the table, my gaze sweeping the room. The portraits on the walls seemed to watch me, their painted eyes following my movements. Their smiles, once merely unnerving, now looked predatory. I felt a prickle on my skin, the sensation of being observed not just by the dead, but by the house itself. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind against the leaded windows felt deliberate, orchestrated. My breath hitched. I tried the doors, the windows. They were all sealed, the wood swollen, the iron latches fused shut. The grounds were a maze of thorny hedges and treacherous ravines. There was no escape. Not that way. It was the key. The house offered it. It wanted me to take it. My resolve hardened. If this house wanted a game, I would play it. But on my terms. I wouldn't be a victim. I wouldn't be a pawn. I would find the heart of this place, the source of its malevolence, and I would confront it. It was smaller than the others, set into the paneling like a secret. It smelled different, not of decay or peaches, but of damp earth and something metallic like old blood. I walked towards it, my steps no longer hesitant but measured. The portraits seemed to lean in, their painted lips curving into silent sneers. The air grew heavy, pressing against my chest, making each breath a labor. It turned with a groan, a sound like a dying animal. Beyond the door was not a hallway, but a descent. The metallic tang intensified, sharp and carpery. A new sound emerged, faint at first, then growing stronger, a rhythmic scraping like fingernails on stone. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to flee. But the apple, it was still there, a silent, crimson promise. And beyond that door, I felt, was the answer. The house was daring me. My foot touched the first step. It was slick, almost greasy. The scraping sound grew louder, more insistent. It was coming from below. The door above slammed shut with a deafening crack, plunging me into absolute black. Panic flared, hot and sharp. I stumbled, my hands scrabbling against the rough-hewn walls. The scraping stopped. Silence descended, thick and suffocating, broken only by the frantic thudding of my own heart. I shouldn't have come. My body went rigid. I couldn't see, couldn't breathe. The scraping started again, closer this time. A low, guttural growl rumbled from the depths. It was too large to be an animal, too fluid to be human, and it was moving towards me. I scrambled down the stairs, my boots slipping on the unseen surface. The metallic scent was overpowering now, a thick cloying miasma that made my head spin. The growl deepened, a sound of pure, unadulterated hunger. I reached the bottom of the stairs, my knees buckling. The air was heavy, like breathing water. My hands, outstretched, met nothing but empty space. The scraping continued, a relentless, maddening rhythm. Then a light. A single dim bulb flickered to life overhead, illuminating a scene that stole the air from my lungs. I was in a vast, echoing chamber. In the center of the room, a massive, ancient machine, all gears and levers and rusted pipes, pulsed with a faint, sickly green light. And before it, chained to the wall, was a figure. It was weeping, a silent, constant stream of tears that vanished before they hit the stone. The scraping sound. It wasn't coming from the figure. It was coming from the machine. Its metal claws, thick as my arm, were dragging against the stone floor, inching closer to the chained figure. And on a small, tarnished metal table next to the machine sat an apple, perfectly crimson, pulsing. There was this the heart of the house. There was this its engine. And was the chained figure meant to be me? The scraping. It was no longer just a sound. It was a feeling, a vibration that wormed its way into my bones, rattling them like dice in a cup. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it to stop, willing it to stop. But it only grew louder, a wet, rasping drag against something rough and unyielding. My hands, slick with a cold sweat, scrabbled at the stone wall behind me, seeking purchase, seeking escape from the suffocating black. It wasn't just my fear anymore. This was its hunger. Then the smell. A carpery tang, like old pennies left out in the rain, mixed with something else, something cloying and sweet, like overripe fruit left to rot. It filled my nostrils, thick and suffocating, and I gagged, a dry, rasping sound in the oppressive silence that had fallen between the scraping. Where was I? And then, my eyes snapped open. I was no longer in the library. The air was heavy, stale, thick with the phantom scent of decay. I was in the cafeteria at 2 a.m. Trays still set out. Trays, laden with the ghostly remnants of a meal long past, sat undisturbed. It looked like spilled coffee, but the carpery smell was still there, clinging to the air, a silent testament to something far more disturbing. My breath hitched. This was a trick. The house was playing with me, shifting its form, its very essence, to disorient and trap me. The scraping sound had ceased, replaced by a new kind of quiet, one that felt pregnant with anticipation. It was watching me. I forced myself to move, one foot in front of the other, the worn linoleum cool beneath my bare feet. I had to find a way out, the will, the promise of wealth. It had lured me here into this thing. I wouldn't let it have me. Not now. Not when I was so close to understanding. A low hum started, a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the room. It vibrated in my chest, making it difficult to draw a full breath. Each tray, each chair, each glint of metal on the serving counter seemed to lunge forward, then recede, playing tricks on my eyes. I remembered Raj's journal, the fragmented entries, the desperate warnings. He had tried to fight it. He had documented its manipulations, its insidious ways of feeding on fear. He had written about a core, a source of its power, hidden deep within the manor. I had dismissed it as the ramblings of a man driven mad by isolation. But now I knew. My gaze fell upon the far wall, where a large, industrial-looking freezer stood, its metal door scarred and dented. The hum seemed strongest there, a palpable wave of energy radiating from it. It felt wrong. It felt like a wound in the fabric of this manufactured reality. My teeth began to chatter. I could see my breath misting in front of my face. The coppery smell intensified, sharp and metallic. It was coming from the freezer. A soft, almost imperceptible click echoed through the room. The freezer door, without any visible force, began to inch open. I could feel a pull, a morbid fascination drawing me closer. But I held myself back, my feet rooted to the spot, my gaze locked on the widening maw of the freezer. The scraping sound returned, not from outside, but from within. It was a wet, guttural sound, like something being dragged across bone. It spoke my name. Not my name, but a name I had never heard, a name that felt ancient and hungry. I knew then, this was it, the source. I could turn and run, try to find a way out of this nightmare. But the house had already shown me there was no escape. It owned every inch of this place, and it owned a piece of me. My hand trembled as I reached into my pocket, my fingers closing around the smooth, cool surface of the silver locket. Raj's locket, his final desperate act. He believed it held a key, a way to fight back. The scraping intensified, a frantic, desperate sound. I took a breath, the cold air burning my lungs. I had to know, I had to see, the scraping. It had burrowed under my skin, a phantom limb scratching at my sanity. I clawed at my own flesh, desperate to dislodge the sensation. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a physical invasion. My breath hitched, a ragged gasp in the oppressive silence that had fallen after the climax. I opened my eyes. The harsh fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like wraiths. The air was thick with the cloying sweetness of stale food and something else, something metallic and sharp that prickled the back of my throat. It smelled like regret, like spilled milk that had curdled into something monstrous. My hands were still clenched, nails digging into my palms. Red welts bloomed where I'd pressed too hard. Yet the phantom sensation of that rasping drag persisted, a memory etched into my nerves. I looked down at my clothes. They were clean, not the threadbare, sweat-soaked rags I remembered wearing during that night. A light gray, simple cotton shirt. No dust. No cobwebs clinging like parasitic growths. Where was the manor? I stood in a vast, echoing space. Rows of metal tables and chairs stretched out before me, all neatly arranged. Trays, still laden with the remnants of a meal I couldn't recall eating, sat waiting. A half-eaten sandwich, a spilled carton of milk, a crumpled napkin. It was as if the entire world had paused mid-bite. The will, the fortune, the promise that had lured me into that decaying trap. It all felt like a fever dream now, a bad hallucination brought on by exhaustion and desperation. The way the house had breathed, its very structure shifting and contorting to trap me, the feeling of being watched, of being consumed. I had faced it, I had fought it, but what had I done? The memory of that final confrontation was a jagged shard in my mind, a desperate act. I walked, my bare feet making soft, slapping sounds on the linoleum. Each step felt deliberate, a reclaiming of my own agency. I passed a window, a large, unbroken pane of glass. No trees clawing at the glass, no distorted shapes lurking in the periphery, just night. I reached the counter, the polished stainless steel cool beneath my fingertips. Behind it, a row of vending machines stood silent. I peered into one, my reflection staring back. Was this it? Was this the resolution? Had I simply been removed, transported from the nightmare to a sterile waiting room? The thought was both a relief and a profound disappointment. Had I survived only to be deposited into another form of captivity, albeit a more comfortable one? My gaze fell on a small, framed notice tacked to the wall behind the counter. It was printed in a stark, black font, devoid of any ornamentation. "Welcome, Raj," it read. "My tenancy has concluded. Please proceed to the designated exit for my final assessment. Failure to comply will result in reassessment." The word hung in the air, heavy and laden with unspoken threat. Assessment. Reassessment. What did it mean? Was this some kind of final exam? A judgment? The metallic tang in the air seemed to intensify, a bitter aftertaste of what had been. I looked back at the rows of empty tables, the uneaten food. It was a tableau of arrested time, a monument to a meal that would never be finished. And I, Raj, was the sole diner, the only one allowed to move. A soft chime echoed through the cafeteria at 2 a.m. Trays still set out. It came from a door I hadn't noticed before, tucked away in a far corner. A single, illuminated arrow pointed towards it. My legs moved before my mind could object. Each step was a question. Was this the way out, or was it the way deeper in? The scraping, though no longer physically present, seemed to echo in the chambers of my ears. It was a promise or a threat. I didn't know which. As I approached the door, I could feel the air shift, growing warmer, heavier. A faint scent like ozone and damp earth began to mingle with the stale cafeteria air. I reached for the handle. It was smooth, cool metal. "Welcome home, Raj." The handle turned. The door swung inward. What lay beyond it I couldn't yet see. Had I truly escaped, or merely traded one prison for another, its bars invisible, its walls yet to reveal themselves?